In this video, I want to very quickly refactor the API features that we've implemented over the last couple of lectures. Now, this is not only to make our code a bit cleaner, it's also to make it more modular and more reusable in the future. So right now, we have all this code for the features that we built before in this getAllTours function, right? And this looks a bit messy. It's a bit hard to understand, okay? And also imagine that we wanted to use these same features for another resource, for example, for the users or later for the reviews. It would be not very practical to basically copy the code from here and use it then in the other resources, right? And so what I'm going to do is to now create a class in which I'm going to add one method for each of these API features, or functionalities, as you might call them as well, all right? So let's go ahead and do that here. And I'm going to do it here for now, and then later on, I'm actually going to export it to its own file, basically to create a reusable module that we can later on import into other controllers. All right. So class, and I'm calling it API Features. All right. Then we start with our constructor function, and remember that this is a function that gets automatically called as soon as we create a new object out of this class. All right. Now, what do I actually want in these API features? Actually, I'm only going to pass in two variables here. Okay. So the mongoose query and also the query string that we get from Express. So basically coming from the route. All right. So that's what we usually have access to in rec.query. Okay. Now again, I'm passing the query here because I do not want to query inside of this class, because that would then bound this class to the tour resource. But again, I want this to be as reusable as possible. All right. So what we usually do in this constructor function is to say this dot query equals the query that we get as an argument, and then this dot query string is equal to the query string. Okay. So very simple, very typical constructor function. And now, as I mentioned, I'm going to create one method for each of the functionality, starting with filter. All right. And so let's now go ahead and cut the code from here. Or actually, I'm going to copy it and then comment it so that I don't do any accidental damage. So copy and then comment and put it right here. So a couple of things that we need to change. First on, request.query is not going to be available inside of this class. And so that's why we actually passed in the query string. And so this here is going to get replaced with this dot query string. Okay. So again, this is just basic JavaScript, has actually nothing to do with Node or Express at all. Then the rest here is okay, but this here is not okay at all. So I do not want to query the tour directly here, remember, but instead I simply want to now add this find to the query that we already have. So this dot query dot find, and so that will then be this. All right, let's now get rid of this. And before we add any more methods here, let's actually go ahead and use this class just so this makes more sense to you. Okay, so how is this actually going to work? And I'm going to do it all here at the end, here under execute query. All right, and so what I can do now is to create a variable called features, for example. And then from here, I will create a new API features object. Okay, so basically creating an instance of this API features that will then get stored into features. And this here will then have access to all the methods that we're going to define in the class definition. Okay, so remember in here we need to pass a query and the query string. So the query, how do we create one? Remember it's tour.find. So there's a query object, and so that's the one that we pass into this class. And then of course the query string, which is rec.query. Okay. Now on these features here, remember we have now access to filter. And so let's actually put it right here afterwards. So dot filter. Give it a save. And so just like this, we're going to run our code for the API filtering functionality. Then here, the next line is of course also not going to work because this query here does not anymore exist. Instead, what we have now is features.query. Right? So after all this processing here, basically, okay, so right now after this filter, this .query will then have this new find method on it. Okay, and so again, this is then stored in this .query. And later on, we will have all these other methods, which all of them will manipulate this .query. So that in the end, this .query is the query that we want to execute. So just like here. Okay, so just like here, we always kept manipulating the query variable. We kept adding more and more methods to it until we then executed it by the end. And so here, we're doing exactly the same. We are simply moving the code into all of these methods. Okay? Then in the end, as I said, the query is going to be stored inside of this property here. And so, yeah, that's where we then do the await and get back the results. All right. Anyway, let's keep moving here and implement the sorting. So I'm copying and commenting. So filter. And the next one is called sort. All right. And so here again, we need to replace request.query with this .query string. Okay. And then query is now this .query. So let's get these four and this .query. Okay. Now the goal here is to basically chain these methods here one after another. So let me show that to you here. So we have filter, and then after that, we want to chain the sort method. Now, right now, that is not really going to work, because where are we actually chaining this sort on? So basically, we're trying to call it on the result of this. But right now, what is the result of this? Well, it's not really anything, because this filter method here doesn't return anything, right? Now, this piece of code here, of course, returned the object that has just been created. And so then we can chain the filter method on that. But the filter method in turn does not return anything. And so at this point, we cannot really then call a sort on the object, right? And so the simple solution to that, and maybe you've done that earlier sometime in your code, is that we have to now return this. So return this, and this is simply the entire object, okay? And the same then down here. So return this. In order to, again, return the entire object, which of course then has access to these other methods, so that we can then call them there. All right? So next up is the limiting. And I'm going to call this one limit fields. And that's because all of these methods have these verbs as names. So it's filter, sort, limit, and then paginate is going to be the next one. So again, rec.query, it's now this dot query string, and query here is now this dot query. All right. Return this, and this is not correct. Okay. And finally, the pagination. Copy, comment. So paginate, return this, and of course we need to replace these rec.query, this .query string, and then here, just like before, it's gonna be this .query. And I just realized that up there, right in the first method, we didn't do this here. So we simply said this .query and then added the find there. But then, of course, we need to actually save it into this query property. Okay, and so I forgot that. And we get some error here. All right, that doesn't really matter here at this moment. Or actually it does, because this line of code here is actually in our paginate method. So let's go there. And in fact, I actually wanted to talk to you about this here. Because if you think about it, requesting the next page, which has 0 result, is not really an error. The fact that there are no results is enough for the user to realize that basically the page that was requested doesn't contain any data. So we do not really need an error in the situation. And so I'm just going to go ahead and delete all this code. Okay. So let me save it now here. And so now, of course, the error is gone. And here we also still have to keep adding these other methods. So limit fields and dot paginate. Give it a save. And again, remember that all of this chaining here only works because after calling each of these methods, we always return this. And this is the object itself, which has access to each of these methods here, making it possible to chain them just like we have it here. Okay, so just to recap, we are creating a new object of the API Features class. In there, we are passing a query object and the query string that's coming from Express. Okay? Then, in each of these 4 methods here that we call one after another, we basically manipulate the query. We keep adding more methods to it, just like we've been doing up here before we did any of this refactoring, right? So we keep adding stuff to the query here until the end, and then by the end, we simply await the result of that query so that it can come back with all the documents that were selected. Okay? And that query now lives at features, which is this object here, so features.query. Okay? I hope that makes sense. So before we do anything else, let's go back to Postman and actually try it out. And we can try it out right here with this top 5 cheap route, because that actually behind the scenes uses all of these API features, right? So if I send it, well, it still works. So that's fantastic. So let's close it. And let me actually also save it here. So get top 5 cheap tours. And yeah, I'm going to leave it there at the end. And now just here, let's do some testing. For example, remove this sort. Let me leave the limit, difficulty, duration, price. So I'm going to leave all of this here just to see if it still works. And it looks like everything is still working, right? So these are the exact same results that we got before or refactoring. So great, perfect, that worked. And so let's now actually delete all this code from here, which makes our route handler so much cleaner, doesn't it? So that's so much better, really. It's day and night. Okay. Now the next step is to actually go ahead and take all this code, cut it, and put it into a new file. So a new module, basically. Okay. And for that, I'm going to create a new folder here, which I'm going to call utils. So that stands basically for utilities. And I'm going to add a couple of stuff in here over the rest of the course. Okay, so this one is going to be called API Features.js and with a capital F here. All right, so here goes our class. And in the end, we do a module.export of this class. So nothing new at this point. Give it a save, close it, and now in here we can require it. So const API features, then require. Then we need to move one folder up, then into utils and API features. Okay, one more test. And taking some time, and here we go. Beautiful. That's really just beautiful. Now, if we create another resource, again, for example, for the users, It's going to be so easy to drop in this same functionality. All we're going to have to do is to require this file and then basically do the same as here. Or maybe in that case, we don't even want to have the sorting ability, or we don't want to have the filter ability. And then all we have to do is to simply take out this line of code, and then like magic, it will only do these 3 functionalities, or these 3 features, okay? And so that's really great. I hope you can see the value of this, and yeah, I'm really happy with this result.